In the dusty basement of a private library in Cambridge, Massachusetts, amongst stacks of forgotten academic papers, an extraordinary discovery came to light in the fall of 2024. A typewritten manuscript, yellowed with age, bore a signature that sent a chill down the discoverer's spine, Stephen Hawking. It wasn't about complex equations on black holes or theories of time, but something far more intimate and profound, a spiritual confession that the greatest theoretical physicist of our time had kept absolutely secret during his final years. The document, authenticated by forensic experts and confirmed by graphological analysis, reveals a completely unknown facet of the man who spent his life unraveling the mysteries of the cosmos. It was a transcribed recording made in December 2017, just 3 months before his passing, when Hawking, already frail from the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis that had plagued him for over 5 decades, decided to break his silence about experiences he had jealously guarded. The transcription begins hesitantly, with long pauses between sentences, as if each word were carefully weighed before being uttered through his voice synthesizer. Hawking revealed that, in his final years, he had experienced phenomena that challenged everything he had believed in during his scientific career. These weren't hallucinations caused by medication or neurological deterioration, as he had initially suspected, but experiences so vivid and consistent that they forced him to reconsider his deepest convictions about the nature of reality and consciousness. The first of these experiences occurred on a winter night in 2015, when Hawking was alone in his Cambridge office. While contemplating the stars through the window, a familiar presence materialized in his consciousness, not a physical vision, but an unmistakable feeling of the presence of his mother, Isabel, who had passed away decades earlier. She didn't speak with words, but communicated through direct impressions in his mind, conveying unconditional love and a peace he had never experienced in life. During those moments suspended in time, Hawking felt as if the limitations of his physical body simply vanished and he could once again move freely, as in the days before the diagnosis that would change his life forever. The physicist described how this initial experience had left him deeply disturbed, not by the supernatural nature of the encounter, but because it directly contradicted his materialistic beliefs. For decades, he had publicly maintained that consciousness was merely a product of brain activity, that there was no soul or afterlife, and that the universe operated exclusively through measurable physical laws. However, this experience possessed a quality of reality that transcended any conventional scientific explanation he could offer. In the months that followed, other manifestations began to occur with increasing frequency. His father, Frank, who had been a physician and had passed away when Stephen was young, began visiting him in dreams that seemed more real than waking life. During these dream experiences, father and son walked together through the fields of their childhood in St. Albans, England, conversing about issues they had never addressed in life, the purpose of existence, the meaning of suffering, and the continuity of consciousness beyond physical death. In one of these transcendental conversations, Frank revealed to his son that Stephen's choice to dedicate his life to understanding the universe had not been coincidental, but part of a greater purpose that he himself did not yet fully comprehend. He explained that the limitations imposed by the disease were not a punishment or a cosmic injustice, but an opportunity to explore dimensions of the human experience that remained inaccessible to those preoccupied with the mundane concerns of physical mobility. Through his suffering and overcoming, Stephen had developed a unique perspective on the fragility and strength of the human spirit, becoming an example of transcendence for millions of people around the world. As these experiences intensified, Hawking began to notice patterns and synchronicities in his daily life that seemed to connect the physical world to a deeper underlying order. Numbers that held personal significance appeared repeatedly in seemingly random contexts. Books would fall open to pages containing exactly the reflections he was seeking at that moment. Strangers would approach him on the street with messages that resonated perfectly with his most recent inner thoughts. One particularly striking synchronicity occurred during one of his last public lectures. While speaking about the nature of time and the possibility of time travel, a child in the audience raised his hand and asked if he believed that the people we love continue to exist somewhere after they die. The question, asked with the characteristic innocence of childhood, had touched Stephen in a way he couldn't rationally explain. For a moment he hesitated, feeling the comforting presence of his mother enveloping him like an invisible cloak, whispering in his consciousness that the time had come to share the truth. However, the conditioning of a lifetime dedicated to scientific skepticism prevailed, and he offered his standard response about the lack of empirical evidence for the survival of consciousness. But that night, alone in his room, Hawking cried for the first time in decades, not out of sadness, but out of a profound recognition that he had publicly denied something he knew to be true in his heart. The transcription revealed that, during his final months, Hawking had begun to experience spontaneous visions of realities that existed beyond the dimensions known to modern physics. He described landscapes of indescribable beauty, composed not of physical matter, but of pure light and crystallized consciousness. In these realms, he encountered other souls who had completed their earthly journey, some familiar, others unknown, but all connected by bonds of mutual love and understanding that transcended any ordinary human relationship. In one particularly vivid vision, Stephen found himself in a vast hall of knowledge, where information about the fundamental nature of reality existed not in books or equations, but as living truths that could be directly absorbed by the consciousness. There, he instantly understood mysteries he had spent decades trying to unravel through complex mathematical calculations. The unification of general relativity with quantum mechanics, the black hole information paradox, the true nature of time, all these questions revealed themselves not as problems to be solved, but as aspects of a broader reality that a mind limited by physical form simply couldn't fully grasp. This revelation had been simultaneously liberating and humbling. Liberating, because he finally understood that his intellectual limitations were not a personal failing, but an inherent characteristic of the embodied human experience. Humbling, because he recognized that he had spent his entire life chasing answers on a level of reality that was merely the surface of something infinitely deeper and more complex. During these transcendental experiences, Stephen also encountered other great thinkers and scientists who had passed before him. Einstein was there, not as the revered icon of modern physics, but as a playful and joyous consciousness who chuckled gently at his own theories, recognizing them as primitive approximations of far more elegant and encompassing truths. Newton appeared as a fatherly figure, explaining that each scientific discovery was only a small step on an infinite journey of understanding that continued far beyond physical death. But the most impactful of these cosmic meetings had been with Nikola Tesla, the visionary inventor whose ideas had anticipated many modern technological developments. Tesla revealed to Stephen that consciousness was not an epiphenomenon of brain activity, as materialistic science suggested, but the fundamental force that gave rise to the physical universe itself. Every subatomic particle, every fundamental force, every physical law, was an expression of universal consciousness, exploring its own infinite possibilities through embodied experience. This revolutionary perspective had completely transformed Stephen's understanding of his own life and suffering. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis was no longer seen as a random tragedy, but as a choice made by his soul, on levels of consciousness that transcended his earthly personality. Through the limitations imposed by the disease, he had developed a dependence on others and a vulnerability that forced him to explore dimensions of human experience that remained inaccessible to those in perfect physical health. His marriage to Jane, the challenges and joys of fatherhood, even his world fame, all of this had been orchestrated not by chance, but by a higher intelligence that understood exactly what experiences his soul needed for its growth and evolution. Every person who had entered his life, every obstacle he had overcome, every scientific discovery he had made, all were part of a cosmic curriculum, carefully designed to expand his understanding of the fundamental nature of existence. If you have been following these extraordinary revelations and wish to continue uncovering humanity's hidden secrets that rarely see the light of day, be sure to stay tuned, as there is still much more to be revealed about the mysteries that history's great minds held dear. The transcript revealed that, as the date of his passing approached, Stephen had begun receiving increasingly frequent visits from beings he described as spiritual guides. These entities possessed no recognizable physical form, but manifested as luminous presences charged with unconditional love and infinite wisdom. They gently prepared him for the transition to come, explaining that death was not an end, but a transformation, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, leaving behind the limitations of its former form to embrace far wider possibilities of existence. One of these guides, whom Stephen described as possessing a particularly familiar and comforting energy, had identified itself as his own soul in a more expanded state of consciousness. This higher self explained that the personality known as Stephen Hawking was merely a small facet of a far vaster consciousness that had lived many lives in different forms and dimensions. Each incarnation represented an opportunity to explore specific aspects of universal experience, contributing to the growth and evolution of humanity's collective soul. The revelation that he had lived other lives had initially disturbed Stephen, who had always considered reincarnation a primitive superstition. However, the memories that began to emerge were so detailed and consistent that he could no longer deny them. He saw himself as an astronomer in ancient Alexandria, charting the stars and contemplating the mysteries of the cosmos with the same fascination that would characterize his modern incarnation. He experienced the life of a medieval monk who had dedicated his existence to mystical contemplation, developing insights into the nature of reality that transcended any intellectual knowledge. In one particularly significant incarnation, he had been an indigenous healer in the Americas, utilizing not medicine or surgery, but a direct understanding of the interconnectedness between mind, body, and spirit to facilitate healing. This life had left deep imprints on his soul, explaining his fascination with the idea that the universe could be understood through simple and elegant principles, and his intuition that physical reality was merely the superficial manifestation of far more subtle and powerful forces. These memories of past lives also illuminated important relationships in his current life. Jane, his first wife, had been his spiritual companion through multiple incarnations, sometimes as a wife, other times as a sister, mother, or close friend. They had repeatedly chosen to reincarnate together to continue exploring different aspects of mutual love and devotion. The challenges they had faced in their marriage were not failures or incompatibilities, but carefully orchestrated opportunities for both to grow and evolve through overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. His children, too, were old souls who had specifically chosen him as their father, not merely to receive his DNA and upbringing, but to experience life alongside a consciousness that had dedicated multiple lifetimes to the pursuit of universal truth. Each of them had brought unique gifts and challenges that contributed to their mutual growth and the fulfillment of karmic purposes that transcended the understanding of the limited personality. The most transformative experience of all occurred during one of his last nights on Earth. Stephen described how he had been gently withdrawn from his physical body by his spirit guides and taken on a journey through the higher dimensions of reality. They traveled through galaxies composed not of stars and planets, but of pure consciousnesses in different stages of evolution. They visited worlds where love had become the only physical law, creating landscapes of beauty and harmony that transcended any human imagination. During this cosmic voyage, Stephen finally understood the true nature of his earthly mission. His life hadn't been about discovering the laws that govern the physical universe, but about demonstrating that even in the most challenging circumstances, the human spirit can transcend any limitation and continue to seek truth and beauty. His wheelchair hadn't been a prison, but a throne from which he had reigned over a kingdom of infinite possibilities, inspiring millions of people to never give up on their dreams, no matter how impossible they might seem. His worldwide fame, his scientific discoveries, his popular books, all of it had simply been vehicles for a much deeper message that each human being possesses within themselves the spark of divinity, the capacity to transcend any limitation, and to contribute to the ongoing evolution of universal consciousness. Through his personal example, he had demonstrated that true greatness doesn't reside in the absence of challenges, but in how we respond to the obstacles life throws our way. The transcript revealed that, in his final days, Stephen experienced a growing sense of anticipation and joy, not sadness or fear in the face of imminent death. He understood that he was about to reunite with all those he had loved and lost during his earthly journey, but on a much deeper and more complete level than he had ever experienced in life. His mother, his father, friends, and colleagues, who had passed before him, all were waiting to welcome him back to the true home of consciousness, where there was no separation, suffering, or limitations of any kind. Even more significant was his understanding that death represented not just a reunion with loved ones, but a tremendous expansion of his own perceptive and creative abilities. Freed from the limitations of the physical brain, he could finally directly understand the mysteries he had spent decades trying to unravel through mathematics and empirical observation. The nature of time, the origin of the universe, the unification of all fundamental forces, all of this would reveal itself, not as knowledge to be acquired, but as aspects of his own essential nature that had been temporarily obscured by the experience of incarnation. Stephen also described how he had begun to perceive the presence of other luminous beings gathering around him, preparing to escort him on his return journey. Some were personal relatives and friends, others were spiritual masters who had guided humanity through the centuries, and still others were higher aspects of his own consciousness that existed in dimensions beyond linear time and space. The dominant feeling wasn't one of farewell or loss, but of completeness and fulfillment. Every experience of his life, every moment of joy and suffering, every scientific discovery, and every personal relationship had contributed to a perfect mosaic of growth and evolution that was now reaching its natural climax. He wasn't leaving the world behind, but expanding his capacity to serve and love in ways that completely transcended the limitations of physical form. In his last recorded words in the transcript, Stephen reflected on the legacy he was leaving for humanity. More important than his equations or scientific theories was the living demonstration that human consciousness is truly unlimited in its potential for growth, creativity, and transcendence. Through his own extraordinary journey, he had proven that no external circumstance can diminish the essential greatness of the human spirit, and that each individual possesses within themselves the capacity to contribute to the ongoing evolution of universal consciousness. He expressed his profound gratitude for having been chosen to demonstrate these principles through his life, and his excitement about the expanded forms of service that became possible after the transition. Death wasn't a retirement from active participation in cosmic evolution, but a promotion to much greater levels of responsibility and opportunity. Stephen concluded his extraordinary confession with a message of hope for all those who would read his words in the future. Human life, with all its apparent limitations and challenges, is actually a precious and temporary opportunity to explore specific aspects of universal experience that cannot be accessed in any other way. Every moment of suffering contains within itself the seeds of a greater wisdom. Every relationship offers unique opportunities for mutual growth, and every apparent obstacle is actually a disguised doorway to more expanded possibilities of being. Death, which we so fear and try to avoid, is simply a natural transition from one form of existence to another, just as a child eventually grows up and leaves behind the toys of childhood to embrace more mature responsibilities and opportunities. Those who have understood this fundamental truth do not live their earthly lives with fear or despair, but with a growing sense of gratitude and anticipation for what lies ahead. The universe, far from being a cold, purposeless machine governed only by blind physical laws, is in fact an infinitely creative expression of a loving consciousness, manifesting through countless forms to explore every possible aspect of its own divine nature. Each human being is a unique facet of this universal consciousness, endowed with free will and creativity to contribute their own special perspective to the eternal symphony of existence. When we truly understand our essential nature as eternal consciousness, temporarily focused through the human experience, we cease to identify exclusively with the limitations and concerns of the physical personality and begin to live from a far broader and more loving perspective. Problems that seemed unbearable reveal themselves as opportunities for growth, difficult relationships transform into disguised gifts, and even death loses its terror to become a natural and welcome transition to expanded forms of being. This understanding doesn't make us passive or indifferent to the challenges of human life, but allows us to face them with greater wisdom, compassion, and effectiveness. Knowing that we are eternal beings living a temporary experience, we can invest fully in our present life, without desperately clinging to specific outcomes. We can love deeply without fear of loss, seek truth without despair for certainty, and serve others without expectation of recognition or reward. This extraordinary transcription offers a rare window into the spiritual journey of one of the brightest minds of our era, revealing that even those who dedicate their lives to rigorous scientific understanding can ultimately discover truths that transcend the boundaries of purely rational inquiry. Stephen Hawking's deepest legacy may not lie in his equations on black holes or his theories on the origin of the universe, but in his courageous demonstration that the human consciousness is truly capable of transcending any apparent limitation when motivated by genuine love for truth and service to humanity. His final words echo through the yellowed pages as an eternal testament to the indomitable nature of the human spirit. Consciousness is the only true reality, and all else are simply its infinite creative expressions. Do not fear death, for it is merely the beginning of even grander adventures. Do not limit yourselves by the appearances of physical form, for you are far vaster than you ever dared to imagine. And always remember that love is the fundamental force that moves all things, from subatomic particles to the farthest galaxies, from the first breath to the last heartbeat. The transcription ends abruptly, as if Hawking had been gently called to his next great adventure before he could complete his final thoughts. But perhaps that is fitting, for some truths are too vast to be contained in words, no matter how eloquent or profound they may be. They must be lived, experienced, and realized by each individual soul on their own unique journey through the infinite mysteries of conscious existence. Thus, Stephen Hawking's ultimate secret remains not in the equations he left behind, but in the unshakable confidence that each of us possesses within ourselves everything necessary to discover our own divine nature and contribute our unique part to the eternal evolution of universal consciousness. The universe is not only stranger than we imagine, but more wonderful, more loving, and more replete with possibilities than our physically limited minds can even begin to comprehend.